All right, well, please sit comfortably in your seat, or if you prefer, you can lie on the floor. Let your feet rest on the floor if you're seated. Your back fairly straight if you can manage that, so that you're kind of solid and balanced. What we want to do is to remain alert but relaxed. That's the only problem with lying down sometimes, is that you're too relaxed, and this does its job of relaxing you, and the next thing you know, you're asleep. So we'll start with 3 deep breaths to begin. In and out, and in and out, and in and out. And now just let your breath come naturally and normally, but turn your attention to your breath. Feeling how it begins as your belly rises, and like a bellows draws that air in through your nose, your mouth. Especially in your nose, you feel that cool air entering your body. And you feel your lungs expanding, your chest expanding slightly. And when you've reached the end of that breath, you just relax and your breath starts to leave. Your diaphragm and belly fall slightly, and you give yourself a little extra hug around the middle to push the last of the air out. And there you've got lungs that are empty and they're hungry for some air, and they start to fill almost by themselves. But you again feel your belly rise and your belly fall. We were talking, among other things, about mathematics and taxes just before we began this. And David pointed out that, if you don't learn geometry, you can't move on to trigonometry. And I was thinking of how true that is for so many things in our human life. I remember how surprised I was in child development classes in high school or college that kids really need to go through a particular set of steps to learn how to walk. They have to first be able to roll over, which leads them to be able to crawl across the floor. Then they need to learn how to raise themselves up to a standing position. And they need to learn to control it so they don't, if you have that memory of learning to walk or have seen kids do that, where they take that first step and all of a sudden momentum takes over and they're just tearing across the room until they lose total control and fall face first onto the carpet. So then you learn how to scoot, keeping your hands on furniture, and move around the outside of the room. Then finally, you learn how to walk without having to hold on to anything, whether it's a couch or your parent's hand. And I think so much of this life is true, that we have to learn in a certain way. We want to jump right over all those necessary steps. We're so impatient sometimes. People come to this practice and they say, I can't focus on my breath. About 3 breaths and I'm long gone into some fantasy or memory, worries, plans, and they think, I'll never learn this. And I always think it's like baking cookies. You might think you'd like to have them sooner than the 25 minutes the recipe says. But it doesn't work to figure, well, I'll just turn the oven up to 600 and they'll be done in 1/3 the time. No, you'll just end up with more quickly done burnt cookies. That's why we encourage and practice patience in mindfulness, that you do kind of have to learn to crawl before you can walk, and walk before you can run. You need, first of all, to just learn to sit still in some ways, and how to begin to focus your attention. So often our attention is like that toddler trying to learn to walk, and they just take off and lose all control, and our attention usually just wanders. Especially if we were perhaps one of those kids who the teachers questioned if we had ADD, or we're like a crow that just gravitates to any shiny thing. And we live our lives in that same way. It's whatever comes up, whatever catches our interest in the moment. And there's nothing wrong with that. Our brains were partly designed to do that. So that if we were hunting and we saw a rustle in a tree, our attention went to that. Or if we heard the sound of a large tiger at the end of the path, we heard that and responded. But there are things that it is worthwhile to learn to focus our attention. If there's a task we have to get done, it used to be in school if there was homework that we needed to have done the next morning. And that attention is kind of a muscle we can develop. So we not only learn patience in watching our breath, in sitting still, but we learn attention. And it can help sometimes to be in a setting where there isn't a lot going on. It's harder to learn to pay attention if you're in the middle of the state fair or at a baseball game and there are people screaming all around you. So we kind of set up the conditions. We sit quietly. We try to sit still. We may sit with others that we get some encouragement that other people are working on the same thing. And we try to focus. We try to keep our attention on our breath. Feeling our belly rise as we breathe in, fall as we breathe out, rise as we breathe in, and fall as we breathe out. And we're shocked oftentimes that it's so difficult to keep with that breath. Or people mistake what the goal of the practice is, that they say, I can't stop my thoughts. But if you learn to hold your attention where you direct it, the thoughts tend to quiet. Although initially they'll be screaming for your attention, as is that itch on your knee, or that worry that's plaguing you, or a sudden rush of emotion that comes up. But we can learn to return again and again to the breath. And in the same way we can learn to do that in other aspects of our life. If we're talking with a friend and we know that it's extremely important to them to know that we're hearing them, listening to them and paying attention, because that can be one of the best gifts we can give a friend. But we all, I think, have that experience of being in a conversation with someone and we're not hearing what they're saying because we're already thinking about what we're going to say next. So we not only learn to focus our attention, we learn to take a little of that attention off of ourselves, to realize that perhaps our friends' words are more important than ours are at this moment. And your breath can be a help in that too. You can let your mind give your attention to your breath as a way to quiet and calm yourself. And then keeping that breath in the background, choose to shine the light of your attention on the words of your friend, or their expressions, their emotions, so that you can be present for them. So we come to this practice. It's like the fundamentals of baseball. You always need to be reminded of how to bunt, how to put your knee down if you're going to stop a ground ball and catch it in your glove. Because we also, part of that over-reliance on how good and important we are, we think, well, I've come so far. I can do so many things. I don't need to remember the basics. But I think we all do. So you watch your breath, and when your mind draws you away, or a sound outside the room draws you away, it may be a while before you realize that it's even happened. But you get better at recognizing it. And it's always an easy thing to do, to just remember what your intention was, to be quiet and watch your breath. And you can return again and again. And eventually the times where your mind wanders, those grow fewer and they don't last as long. It may be just 2 breaths and you think, oh, I've lost the thread of my attention. And you bring it back to your belly rising and your belly falling, feeling your breathing in and breathing out. And the best description I've heard of why this is so important is that especially if we are just running blindly through life, our attention shifting to whatever shiny thing comes up in front of us, there is so much we might be missing, which is partly where patience comes in, where non-judgmental action towards ourselves comes in. It's just the same as if a teacher teaches us by yelling at us and telling us what we're doing wrong. If we do the same to ourselves, we're not going to have much interest in learning to pay attention. And we'll miss that child's laugh, the scent of spring on the breeze, that beautiful sunset. Things that when we're attending to them and taking it all in, we can't believe how beautiful they can be, and we can't imagine that we missed it. And the thing about attention is that our entire lives become what we pay attention to in each moment. And if we never learn to pay attention, we can come to the end of our lives and not even realize all the things we missed. Or if we focus on what we choose to focus on, which might mean for some of us, instead of choosing to focus on the negative, we train ourselves to choose to focus on the positive. One way to do that is to think about what's the best thing that happened to me today at the end of your day. It's like a trick, or giving yourself an assignment. As you go through the day, you remember, you kind of wake up and return to that intention you had, to be able to think back and think about what was the happiest moment you had during the day. And you automatically begin paying attention again if your thoughts and attention have wandered. So even away from this practice, you can begin to bring that focus on your attention back into every breathing moment you have. And you'll really find that life is much more joyful and beautiful when you are paying attention. So try throughout this coming week to pause, if it's only for 3 breaths. Kind of clear your mind of those shiny things and just take 3 deep breaths. And remember, your assignment for this week is to pay attention to each day, so at the end of the day you can say quite clearly, this was the happiest thing that happened to me today. Try that and we'll check back next week to see how that went. For now, we'll close with 3 deep breaths, and when you're ready, open your eyes.